because there is no way I am force ranking these books. No, 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 no. We once again get a character named Audrey. I mean, keep it coming, my friends. Keep it coming. This is like a video of writers I want to be. My head just completely blanked. Again, strive to be a fraction of the writer that he is. And as someone who's been wearing her invisibility cloak for a long time, the one and only. He's my one and only. This is the only one left. Hi everybody, it's Audrey and welcome back to Chapter and Converse and welcome to my final Best of 2023 video. So today we're going to talk about my favorite 15 that I read this year. So if you have been following along here or on Instagram, you will have seen me pumping out some content about some of my favorites in terms of debuts and audiobooks and authors that I know and love and all sorts of other things, and my best of 2023. But this is kind of my final curated list of the books that when off the top of my head, I was trying to think of books that I would consider my favorites of the year. These are the ones that instantly popped to mind. So I did curate it down to 15 and well, I do have a couple tops. The rest of them we're just going to talk about in a generalized order because there is no way I am force ranking these books. No, 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 no. So here we go. Let's start with Good Girls Don't Die by Christina Henry. I read this at the end of November and I loved this book. So again, if you've been following my journey, you know I did National Novel Writing Month in November and I really struggled to connect to a lot of books, not because the books were not good, but because I was writing all the time. I was lost in my own story. I was having a hard time letting go and getting out of my head. And while I did read some good books and listen to some nonfiction, it was very hard for me to literally get lost in story. And this book sucked me in and I was lost in all the best ways possible. So this is my first Christina Henry book. This is kind of a horror twinge thriller, I would say. And I did not plan this, but the tagline on this is "Getting lost in a story can be deadly." So in this book, we are following three different women, Celia, Allie, and Maggie, and they each wake up in a story and a life that is not their own. And they are aware of this, but they don't know how to get out of it. So we have a slasher horror movie, we have a YA dystopian, and we have a cozy mystery. And they can't figure out how they kind of got into this mess and how they're going to get out of this mess. So I loved the way this played with all of the typical tropes you see in those books and how these women meandered through their stories. Meandered is not the right word. How they lived their stories and what was really going on here. So I don't know. I just had such a fun time with it. I loved the writing. I loved the women. I loved the overall feel of this book and it just pulled me in, and there's just nothing like a book that can pull you in. So I wasn't necessarily slumping, but I felt like this really broke me out of kind of the drag I was in with books and my inability to focus. So cheers to Christina Henry, because she got me. She got me. Okay, another book that absolutely terrified me. I read this back in January. This is The Butcher and the Wren by Elena Urquhart. So she is the co-host of the Morbid podcast, so we should know that this was going to be dark and messed up. But we are following a serial killer and a forensic pathologist who is Dr. Wren Muller. So it says something dark is lurking in the Louisiana bayou. So we have some really terrible crime scenes. And we have them trying to figure out what is going on, and we get the POV from the killer. And this was creepy and uncomfortable and claustrophobic and dark and gritty and gruesome and just everything you can possibly imagine. This is just under 250 pages. This book packed such a punch. This felt like a longer story in all the best ways. Like the characters were developed, the full story was there, nothing felt rushed, nothing felt cheated, and it was just such a compact, like, oh my God, this book. So Elena Urquhart herself is an autopsy technician, so we get her like inside the morgue, hands-on perspective, so it does not It's not a surprise to say there is a level of authenticity to this book, very much in the way that Patricia Cornwell brings authenticity to her Kay Scarpetta series, but I loved this. I definitely was a bit freaked out at night, and I didn't mention this I did a video about kind of like some runner-up books, and The Last Word by Taylor Adams was a book later in the year that absolutely gave me a nightmare reading something from that. So I'm not totally squeamish, but I can definitely let books get in my head, and this one totally did. So loved it. Can't wait to read more from her. And then on a totally lighter note, I read How to Fake It in Hollywood by Ava Wilder. Who's surprised that I've got a romance on my top books of the year? I loved this book. And I want to say Ashley Winstead was talking about it in a podcast I was listening to her talk about The Boyfriend Candidate, her contemporary romance. So this book came out, I want to say, in 2022, because I did pick up Will They or Won't They, which I haven't read yet. I was trying to like savor some of these books, but anyway, this came out in 2022. So we have a Hollywood angle, and it's a fake dating story. So Gray is a former teen soap star, and she is trying to change her image. She is trying to break out and trying to break into kind of the movie business. And then we have Ethan Atkins, who just wants to be left alone. He had a high-profile divorce. He had a little bit of scandal, I would say. His longtime creative partner and best friend died. He definitely has a bit of a drinking problem, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with anything. He's dropped out of the scene. But they share a publicist named Audrey. And she thinks it would be a great idea for both of their images to get together. And they fake date, and all sorts of fake dating tropes ensue, but also in the best way possible. So I loved the Hollywood angle of this, and the whole idea of what you're seeing is so not real, and how fake things are. And I mean, obviously I know what we see is not real. Like, you can't believe everything you see on E! And other entertainment sources. But I loved this inside baseball kind of look at all of it. And these characters were so well drawn. The connection was so fantastic. This is very steamy. Door kicked open. I loved it. And I loved that it went to much darker and more complicated places. So while there are moments of levity absolutely in this book, and there is a lot of fun-loving stuff in this book, it does not shy away from really hard, difficult topics. And I thought it was just so fantastically done. The emotion, the connection between these characters, I was rooting for them. He definitely gave me a little bit of a Ben Affleck vibe. And I don't know if he was supposed to, but he did. And that was absolutely what I was thinking about. It was like a heyday Ben Affleck. Just, I just loved it. I loved him so much. But Ethan and Gray are so good. They're just such great characters. So I hugely recommend it. I'm excited to read her next one, but what a fantastic new to me author. And then back to murder, because of course, this is Jamie Lynn Hendricks, her husband's murder. So this is the UK cover. This is called It Could Be Anyone in the US. And in this one, we have another group of friends from college, favorite tropes here. And they are getting together in Miami for the wedding of one of the girls in the group. So she is marrying outside the group. And what we find out on page 1 is that the groom drops dead at the wedding reception. So whodunit? So we go backwards in time with them coming to Miami. We get some flashbacks of everyone with the groom, what's been going on, kind of the history between all of them. Everybody's got secrets. Everybody's got a motive. Who did it? What happened? What really went down? And I loved it. This is my first Jamie Lynn Hendricks book, and I binged this big time. I read this at the beginning of February, and it just completely turned me on to her as an author. Like, it's just wicked and dark and witty. And I just love a friend group. I love a friend group. I love a dark and messed up friend group. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay. Another one of my favorite people is Riley Sager, the one and only. The one and only. He's my one and only. This is the only one left. So his new 2023 book, this is our Lizzie Borden story, so to speak, but with a bit of a twist. So it is, what if Lizzie Borden grew old and needed someone to come take care of her? And we are seeing this through the POV of her caretaker, and then through a past timeline. So this is set in 1983. We have a home health aide named Kit McDeer, and she is kind of desperate for a job. There is reasons why she can't say no to taking care of the famous Lenora. And this is set in a mansion on a cliffside in Maine, where Lenora's entire family, her parents and her sister, were murdered back in 1929. And Lenora was the prime suspect, but was never convicted. But she has basically been holed up and living in this house ever since. So shrouded in mystery, definitely a lot of suspicion around her. And she has her own nursery rhyme, which says, at 17, Lenora Hope hung her sister with a rope, stabbed her father with a knife, took her mother's happy life. It wasn't me, Lenora said, but she's the only one not dead. So we get to see things in the past and present timeline, trying to piece together what happened, how Kit gets sucked into this world and sucked into Lenora's life. And then the hitch twist with Lenora is that she is confined to a wheelchair. She cannot speak, she cannot move, and she only has the ability to move one of her hands. And she uses it to type out messages on her typewriter to Kit and tells Kit, I'm going to tell you what really happened back then. So, oh, Riley. Love him, love him, love him. Okay, another new to me author. This is The Quiet Tenant. This is by Clemence Michelon. So Jordy, I feel like Jordy from Jordy's Book Club famously coined this as if Luke Dane was a serial killer. And this is in no way, shape, or form a Gilmore Girls kind of a book, but we are set in a small town kind of up in the Hudson Valley, and we are following the point of view of 3 different women. So our main character, our Luke Danes of it all, is Aiden Thomas. He is a hardworking family man. He has a teenage daughter. His wife has recently passed away after being ill. He's been living in the family house and he is forced to move. And that's never fun. But part of the problem for Aiden is that he also has to move the woman who has been held captive in the shack behind his house for the past 5 years. So we get to see this through the point of view of the woman he has been holding captive, from his teenage daughter, and then from a woman who owns a restaurant in town who has all sorts of smitten-y feelings for Aiden. And he is not a good dude. So we get to see things through their perspectives. He is a kidnapper. He is a serial killer. He is a father. And he is a well-respected citizen of this town. And following his wife's death, there is obviously a lot of sympathy for him as well from these townsfolk who have known him for a really long time. So this is so, I think, inventively, creatively done. And just what an outstanding, this is her US debut. She is a French author. She has written a book that was released in France. But I was so blown away by this book. It totally exceeded my expectations. I feel like goes without saying that it's really, really dark, but I thought it was so inventive the way we're seeing this through the different women's perspectives. And there's so many moments where, I mean, it just really messes with your minds in a lot of ways. And I just loved it. I absolutely loved it. And I'm very excited to see what she does next, but I highly recommend this book. Seeing him through their eyes, it's so interesting. And I was listening to an interview with Clemence afterwards, like after I had read the book, but she was promoting it. And she said that the idea partially came to her during the panorama. Her and her husband were living in this, I don't know if they were living in the city or in Brooklyn, but his family lived up in the Hudson Valley, so they moved in with them. And she talked about, you know, the transition of everybody being home together all the time. And what if you had been basically leading this double life and having this deep, dark secret, and now all these people are around you? Like, how do you hide the darkness that you are? And also the house itself, which is like the house in the book, is her in-laws' house, which I think is just great. But she didn't tell any of them any of this until after she wrote the book. So I just love the story behind the story. But that's an absolutely fantastic book. And then another one, which I have talked about several times, is All the Sinners Bleed by S.A. Cosby. He is such an incredible crime writer. Such beautiful, beautiful prose. I can't explain enough how mind blown I am that he can write just very dark Southern Gothic crime fiction with such poetic words and language. And it definitely is like a bring you to your knees, but also kind of like makes you want to cover your eyes while you're reading parts of it. He so seamlessly explores so many different facets, so many different emotions, and I just feel like he's just, he's so incredible. I listened to this on audiobook. I had the ALC from Flatiron? I don't know if I got it from Flatiron or Libro. Eek. Anyway, it was read by Adam Lazarre, who has done all of his audiobooks, who talk about like elevating an audiobook. I couldn't recommend him more. But this one is a black sheriff, a serial killer in a small town ready to combust. So we are in Sharon County, Virginia, and we are meeting Titus, who is a former FBI agent. He is now the first black sheriff in this town. And when the book opens, we have a shooting at a school, which eventually leads to them discovering more crimes, more murders, more really dark and messed up things happening in this small town. But what we get on top of this is we get such great relationship. So S.A. Cosby writes a lot about father-son relationships. Razorblade Tears really explored that. In this book, we're exploring it in a different way. We have Titus and his father, who he lives with, and we're seeing romantic explorations of relationships. We're seeing the small town. We're seeing definitely a lot of religious overtones. There's a lot of racist overtones. There is a lot of sort of like the small town mindset in a lot of ways, and how everything connects, why Titus left the FBI, this reluctant return home that he maybe had made, but he's making a life for himself there, how the town is viewing him. It is, I feel like in the audiobook video I said it wasn't as violent as Razorblade Tears, and it's not, because you're not necessarily seeing all the violence played out in live on the page, but you're seeing the aftermath of a lot of it. So I don't want anyone to think that it's not dark and bloody and violent. It is a different look at the violence and sort of a different perspective. So not the same like shoot it up, shoot it out kind of violence as we saw in Razorblade Tears, but it's definitely both implied and written for us. But Titus is such an amazing character. This book like shocked me and freaked me out. And like I said, kind of made me want to cover my eyes and made me cry. And he can evoke so much emotion. I just, like, I bow down to him as an author. Like, I could only dream of being a fraction of an incredible author the way that he is, but absolutely loved it. Such a great book and one of the best covers of the year for sure. Okay. Another author that I absolutely bow down to is my good friend Peter Swanson. This is All the Beautiful Lies. This is one of his older backlist books, and let me see, 2018. So I had heard that this was messed up, kind of in different ways. It is definitely messed up. There is some highly uncomfortable content to this book, but let it say what it does about me. I loved this book. It goes to some really super dark and messed up places, and I was listening to this interview with Jessica Knoll, and she talked about taking big swings, and I feel like Peter Swanson took a lot of big swings here. I feel like he doesn't hold back. I've mentioned this in another video too, to go all in, and I feel like this is the book that I was thinking about when I'm thinking about my own writing, is just to put it all out there, hold nothing back, even if it is dark and messed up and uncomfortable, because I didn't connect with it, but I loved it. So in this book, we are following Harry Ackerson, and he is a senior in college. He has just gotten the news that his father has passed away. So he returns to their town in Maine. His father is been remarried for a few years to a stepmother, Alice. His mom passed away when they were living in New York City, and after she passed away, they wound up moving up to Maine. So Alice is decidedly younger than his father was. So we have a bit of a strange relationship between them. And then we start to see some questions come up about what actually happened to his father, and Harry is trying to figure out exactly what happened. We are getting some multiple POVs, we are getting some multiple timelines. We have Harry meeting some other people that is starting to raise questions, but Peter Swanson can really just do the dark and messed up, and I love it. I know it's uncomfortable, but I really loved everything about this book. I again strive to be a fraction of the writer that he is. Okay, next up I have All Good People Here by Ashley Flowers. This is another true crime vibe to it. And in this one, we're also getting multiple timelines, multiple POVs. She is the podcaster from Crime Junkies, amongst other things. So this book is set in Indiana, and it says, everybody remembers the infamous case of January Jacobs, who was discovered in a ditch hours after her family awoke to find her gone. So Margot Davies, who was our main character, was 6 years old at the time. She was neighbors to January and her family. And now it is 20 years later. She is making a reluctant return home because her uncle has taken ill and she's come back to take care of him. And then we wind up getting a case in the present day that is similar to what happened to January. And she starts to investigate and tries to figure out what happened. So there were theories about what happened in the past. There's a lot of questions, obviously, around what is happening in the present. And Margot, who is a journalist, is committed to finding the truth and basically will stop at nothing to get it. So I loved this. Again, goes without saying, dark and messed up in all the best ways possible. Okay, more dark and messed up. This is I'm Not Done With You Yet by Jessie Q. Sutanto. This is her adult thriller debut. So talk about a woman who, again, this is like a video of writers I want to be. She has written so many books in so many genres. She blows my mind just on that level. And then this book, this was gifted to me by Berkeley. This was 1000% a book I was about to buy. I was so engaged in this book. She writes a main character who has such a filter-free, all the things you wish you could say kind of a voice, in the vein of Paloma from My Sweet Girl, from Chloe from Never Saw Me Coming. And I fell instantly in love with her. So in this one, we have two women who were friends at Oxford. And in present day, Jane is a mid-list writer. She's living in the Bay Area with her husband. Life is just sort of, And then she is looking through the paper one day and she sees that her former best friend, who she knew from Oxford, Thalia, who is a huge author, who is super rich, who is super famous, is going to be at an event in New York City. And Jane hasn't seen her in years and needs to see her. So basically, things happen. And she finds herself there, and this is a perfect dark and messed up toxic female friendship book. Again, multiple POVs, past and present mysteries, very twisty, super well written, very complicated characters, and lots of just morally messed up things happening in this book. And I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. Okay, speaking of morally messed up characters, Kill for Me, Kill for You by Steve Kavanaugh. This comes out in the US in 2024. I had done, I want to say it was like my Q&A video that I did, and one of my fantastic viewers, thank you very much, let me know about this book, which was not even on my radar. So I did buy this from Blackwell's. This has a Strangers on a Train premise to it. So again, I'm like, what is the name of the book? I was going to say A Time to Kill. Oh my God. The Kind Worth Killing by Peter Swanson. My head just completely blanked. One of my all-time favorite books with a Strangers on the Train premise. So when I heard that this had a similar, only in the Strangers on a Train vibe to it, I had to pick it up. So this is sadly only my second Steve Kavanaugh. I feel like such a loser. 13 was such a fantastic book. I made so many promises to myself I was going to read more of him, bought more of him, and didn't read it. This was a very similar binge feeling reading experience to 13. So in this one, we have two women. I love the inside cover of this. One dark evening in New York City, two strangers meet by chance. Over drinks, Amanda and Wendy realize they have so much in common. They both feel alone, they both drink alone, and they both desperately want revenge against two men who destroyed their families. Together they have the perfect plan. If you kill for me, I'll kill for you. So I would say that's all you need to know, and just go. This is set in New York City. I loved the atmosphere of this. I just loved everything he did in this book. He's such a page-turning kind of a writer. And again, don't hold anything back. Take big swings, all the darkness on the page. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Definitely check this out. You can get it now in the UK. And I will put the 2024 release date down below so you guys know, but I loved it. Okay, we're in the home stretch. So a new to me author, which I'm so excited to read the sequel in this, which is coming out in January. This is Everyone in My Family Has Killed Somebody by Benjamin Stevenson. This is a fourth wall breaking, meta, self-aware mystery. If you know the genre, he plays with everything in it. It is a family who is getting together for a reunion. They are in Australia. It is a ski kind of getaway because one of the people in the family is getting out of jail and they are all reuniting to welcome him home. And like the title tells you, everyone in this family has killed someone. So we are following Ernie Cunningham, who writes sort of how-to books for how to write a murder mystery. So he knows all the rules, he knows all the tropes, he knows when everything is supposed to happen. And he tells you at the very beginning of the book, like he's like, if you're just here for the murders, I'm going to give you a list of all the page numbers where the murders take place. So you can feel free to skip ahead. So it's like, it is either a murder has either happened or reportedly happened on page 14, page 46, page 65, and goes on and on. So he's like, you can just jump ahead and read because I'm going to tell you. He gives you a list of rules at the beginning of the book. He definitely, I talked about this in my kind of like runner-up video. Alex Michaelides does a very similar thing with The Fury, and I loved it. So I love the fourth wall breaking. I love him talking to us. I love him, you know, owning, you know, what tropes are supposed to happen, what twist is supposed to come when, where we are at in the story, what the reader expectation is, what the clues are, like all of it. And I just thought it was so great. This is another fantastically dark and messed up family. We once again get a character named Audrey. I mean, keep it coming, my friends. Keep it coming. And I just think it was so smart. So it says there are plenty of killers in my family, but only one murderer. So they are together at this snowy reunion. Murder ensues. Investigations need to ensue. And I just thought it was so great. Such a fun time. Everyone, what's the name of the second book? Look over there. They're on a train. Comes out in January. I will link it down below for you guys, but I'm definitely going to be buying that and reading it, and I'm excited for it. So super fun. Okay. You take a breath. We're in the top 3. So these are officially my top 3 books of the year. So the first one I want to talk about is Midnight is the Darkest Hour by Ashley Winstead. You guys know I am so obsessed with her. I love her so, so much. I did an entire reading vlog on this book, which starts out spoiler free, and then I break into a spoiler section. So if you're curious, definitely check that out. But this is small town murder, mystery, so much commentary on so many different things. I really hesitate to say much of anything. I went into this super blind. What I knew about it is what she had originally pitched about it, which was, it was Every Summer After by Carly Fortune with murder, which I was instantly intrigued. You guys know the story. I went out and bought Every Summer After because I didn't know what it was, which is a second chance romance. 2 people who fall in love as teenagers and then reunite again as adults. So in this book, we have Ruth Cornier and a boy named Everett. So they meet when they are in high school, and then we find them again in present day. So when this book opens, a skull is found kind of in the bayou, and this is not a town that has murder. This is not a town who has this kind of mystery to it. So the police are investigating. They're trying to figure out who it is, and Ruth is standing there watching, and she thinks she knows who the skull belongs to because she's pretty sure her and Everett put it there. So I was listening to an interview with Ashley Winstead, many interviews, but she talked about this as being murder footloose. So she's the preacher's daughter, Ruth. And it definitely has a murder footloose vibe to it too, but it's really dark. It really comments on so many different things. It's thoughtful. It's well done. I loved it from start to finish. I applaud everything that this woman does. I give her so much credit for how incredibly well written her books are. Again, someone who can turn a phrase, someone who I long to be someday, just even a fraction of how amazing she is. So loved it. And then another completely probably shocking turn. I have The Idea of You by Robinne Lee. This is the third to last book I read in 2023. No one is more surprised than me. Like How to Fake It in Hollywood surprised me. This book I listened to the audiobook. Robinne Lee narrates it. She is an actor. She does such a fantastic job with this. She's got British accents. She's got French accents. She puts so much weight and emotion and vulnerability and sensitivity and pain and love and lust into this book. And I loved everything about it. So another Hollywood-ish rock star kind of a vibe. The tagline on this is, what if your teenager's fantasy was your reality? So we are following Selene Marchand. She is a 39-year-old divorced mom of a teenage daughter. And when the book opens, she has to take her 12-year-old and a bunch of her friends to a boy band concert for August Moon in Vegas. They live in LA because her ex-husband won these tickets in a raffle, like bought them in a, I don't know, charity event. And it's tickets and it's backstage passes and it's the whole thing. And Selene is like, whatever. So they wind up going, and she winds up meeting Hayes, who is one of the 20-year-old boys in the boy band, aka Harry Styles meets Prince Harry, meets people from Robinne Lee's past. And there is an instant chemistry and connection. And eventually they agree to have lunch in LA, even though she's like, dude, you're 20 and I'm 39. But there's like an instant attraction between the two of them. And lunch basically transforms into, what if your teenager's fantasy was your reality? So we get celebrity, we get the rock star lifestyle. They are meeting all over the world. She is traveling to meet him. He's touring with the band. There's such an interesting perspective on celebrity and the fantasy of it and the reality of it. And there is so much door kicked open, delicious romance to this book. And I loved it. And what I also love about this, and in reading an interview with Robinne Lee afterwards, she, like after I read the book, she originally was trying to write a book, or intended to write a book that is about women on that cusp of 40, women in their 40s, and the invisibility that comes with it and how people view you differently. She experienced this as an actress, and how you're no longer the girlfriend and maybe you're the mom and you're also kind of not even wanted for roles, and what it means to grow older as a woman and how society views you and how you view yourself, and contending with that. And as someone who's been wearing her invisibility cloak for a long time, I found it so interesting, this perspective. So it's really also a story about a woman who is reclaiming her identity, her sexuality, her life, and taking ownership of it, and having one heck of a fun time along the way. But there's also so much raw emotion to this book. Like, I was riveted. I was so moved by it. I just completely exceeded my expectations. I thought it was going to be just sort of like, not like a throwaway read, but just sort of like an easy bingeable book. I was so emotionally invested in it. Like, when I tell you I'm like this close to getting a Selene and Hayes t-shirt from Robinne Lee's website, don't be surprised if you tune back in and see me wearing one. So this is being turned into an Amazon Prime movie, or a movie that's going to be on Amazon Prime. I'm curious to see how they execute on it, but the book was so incredible. I highly recommend the audio. I read along for parts of it, so you can see a lot of it is dog-eared, and the front I have to go back to because I didn't have my book. I wasn't always holding the book while I was listening to it, but anyway, I loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. And then my number one book of the year, hands down, which I feel like will surprise nobody, is Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. I was blown away by this book. I had not had this kind of emotional reading experience in such a long time. And this was a book, I did a big review on this on my Instagram and on my Goodreads, but a book that I simultaneously wanted to binge, but I also needed to step back from, and wanted to slow down and absorb every word and every emotion and everything. This is a book that was 5 years in the making for her. It is so well researched. It is so well done. I why am I being formal? I talked about how I read Luckiest Girl Alive when it came out, and I had a very complicated relationship with that book. So hesitation is not the right word. I wasn't sure if Jessica Knoll was going to be the author for me, but the premise of this book, the buzz around it, fellow reviewers and booktubers and bookstagrammers who I love, who were reading this and loving it, I had to give it a go. And I am now going to reread my Jessica Knoll books. I went back out and got Luckiest Girl Alive, which I had unhauled, and I picked up The Favorite Sister. But I am just mind blown by what she has done in this book. And the more interviews I have watched and read with her, I am just blown away by her as a woman and as an author and as a producer and a writer and a businesswoman. And I just think she is fantastic and amazing in everything that she's doing. But this book is a thinly veiled fictional retelling of the US, America's most famous kind of first serial killer. So he goes unnamed in the book. He is only referred to as the defendant. I will only refer to him as the defendant. But it dispels a lot of myths, a lot of story about this very famous man who was dubbed a sex killer, who was dubbed like a JFK lookalike, and portrayed as so smart and debonair and like this mastermind criminal. And really, he just was not that smart, and he was a bit lucky, and he preyed on the kindness of women, and he pretended to be injured, and he wreaked havoc all across the country. And the way people treated him led to so many more people being murdered. So, and by I mean trusting him, so he escaped prison, which led to more people being murdered. So this book starts in January 1978 on the campus of FSU at a sorority house where a man comes in and attacks and murders several sisters in the house. And we are following the perspective of Pamela, who is the sorority president, who has witnessed a person leaving the house that night and who is grappling with the loss of her friends, of what happened in her home, of how to move forward from this. And we see how she is treated by the police, how she tries to hold things together. And there is so much of this book that is steeped in fact of what happened. And I will say one of the things that was the most shocking to me is I knew nothing really about this man other than an overarching kind of high-level highlight of what he had done. And after I read this book, and a bit along the way, I wasn't fact-checking it in the sense that I was like, did Jessica Knoll get this right? But I was more like, she's giving specific dates or locations or things that happened. And again, so much steeped in what actually happened. And when you start to read not only the newspaper articles and the stories, you can see how much of what is shocking to me in this was what was really happening at the time. And even the title of this book, Bright Young Women, the transcript from when he was convicted, the judge actually refers to him as a bright young man and doesn't even reference the victims, and just how terribly gross that is. But I feel like Jessica Knoll takes back the story and she gives all of the victims voices. So we get a parallel storyline in this and a parallel timeline. But what winds up happening is a woman named Tina shows up in Florida and tries to meet with Pamela because Tina is convinced that the man who murdered these girls at the sorority house is the same person who out in Seattle was murdering women. So they work together to try and prove these connections that nobody else is seeing and talking about. So this is such an emotionally gut-wrenching story. There is so much power given to these women. There is so much strength given to these women. There is so much just pain. It's uncomfortable. It is dark. It's so hard to believe that so much of this is what really happened. And I think that's what led to so much of it being disturbing. But the language is beautiful. And again, she gives so much voice to these characters that no one ever gave voice to these victims before. And I talked about, there was an outstanding documentary on Amazon Prime, which I watched afterwards, which is all about the point of view of the women, of the victims, of his former girlfriend, people who tried to report him, who were dismissed by the police, who were dismissed by other men in their life, and just how many people were in tune to this man and how dismissed they were. Women who were survivors of him, family members of victims. It's really difficult to watch, and I think it's worth watching because, again, it really dispels so many myths that were out there and takes away this mystique about this man who was just an average guy who, again, is just a monster but was not this amazingly smart, witty, fantastic man that they made him out to be. So I just, again, I bow at Jessica Knoll's feet. This is such an outstanding book. I have not stopped thinking about this. I read this at the end of August. I was just speechless after I read it, and I can't wait to reread it because it is one of those books that I think you will continue to get things out of, and I just can't recommend it enough. So definitely dark, definitely difficult, but if it is in your wheelhouse in any shape or form, I would absolutely give it a read because it, life-changing feels like a really big statement to make, but it is one of those books that I definitely think has altered me as a writer, me as a reader, and has had such a profound impact and has made me see things and think about things in a different way than I had before I read it. So I don't know. I'll leave you with that. I just loved it so much. I absolutely loved it so much. And I physically read it, but Sutton Foster, who I am obsessed with, does the audiobook. So I can't imagine how amazing that is. So I might actually do an audiobook of it as well, but definitely my favorite book of the entire year. So there you have it. This is it. This is it. This is it. I am so grateful for all the amazing books I read. I am so grateful for the selection of amazing books that are out there. And you guys know, and that's why you're here, there is absolutely nothing better than falling in love with a book and getting lost in pages and loving story. And whether you are laughing or you are crying or you are moved or you are scared or you are just turning pages or you're just having a good old time, there's just nothing better than an absolutely fantastic book. So on that note, thank you guys so much for watching. Tell me, what was your favorite book of 2023? Which book, I don't know, blew you away, made you laugh, made you cry, whatever it is, just give me a favorite down below. Because one of the things I've already started doing, which it's also surprised nobody, is looking at other people's favorite books of the year, and I'm starting to pull together a list of books, and some of them were on my radar already, and some of them I maybe was not sure about, but they've moved up higher on the list. So planning to read some of those in the year to come. But thank you guys so much for watching. Thanks for being here in 2023. I know you're watching this in 2024, but thank you guys so much for supporting me and my channel and just being fantastic. And it's just, there's nothing better than talking books with people who love books. So I love your enthusiasm. I love your excitement, and I'm super grateful for everybody. And I hope everyone is doing well and you had a great end to your year. And I will see you guys in another video very soon. So until then, take care, everybody. Bye.